All right. Thanks so much, folks. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Melissa Hamilton. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the deputy director here at Leeway Foundation. I'm really glad to be here with you tonight, quite honestly. It's hot as Hades in my house, but it's a little cooler being here with all of you virtually tonight. I also want to provide a visual description for folks on the call who may need that, particularly for folks who are blind and or low vision. I'm a fat, white, masculine of center woman. I have short, sort of pompadoured hair. It's not as high today because it's hot. I'm wearing gold rimmed glasses and a short sleeve green V-neck t-shirt that you can see. I'm also joined by my colleague Gabe Laredo and Sweet, but I'll let them introduce themselves. So Gabe, if you'll kick us off next.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. My name is Gabe. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm Leeway's program assistant. I'm super excited to be here with everyone tonight. Visual description is I'm a round-faced, light-skinned person with a mop of curly brown hair, wearing a green Eagles t-shirt in a very messy studio right now. Yeah, and then Sweet, if you could also introduce yourself and then give us a description of your artistic practice and also your art and change grant project, Soundtracking Freedom, if you can.
Hey y'all, how y'all doing? My name is Sweet Corey-Bey. I use the pronouns they, them, theirs. I guess the description of myself is that I'm a brown skinned person. I got twists with multicolored beads hanging on my forehead and blue space glasses on that are prescription and work very hard to help me to see the things around me. And I have on a blue shirt with Black people getting their hair done on it. And I am a musician. I'm a bass player. I come through the traditions of jazz, funk, soul, and blues. I feel very close to the blues historically and ancestrally. I call myself a blues them a lot. Like I'm not a blues man, but I'm a blues them. I tour with musicians, I perform with musicians, and I really move my work through the world in the musical idiom. And with being a modern artist, it comes with a lot of different skill sets. So I can, like create visually and like make flyers or like graphic designs and things like that. I record music often, my own music. I have like an experimental sound practice, just like playing with different things and like scoring works for people. I love to cook, although I consider that kind of like a hobby and not really a semi-professional pursuit like that my art is for me. And yeah, my project that I did was Soundtracking Freedom. And it was really a community visioning discussion. I really see myself in my practice as a cultural organizer. So I'm using music to create experiences for folks to just sort of like be and become to. My projects a lot of times are places where folks convene. It's where they meet other people. It's where they discuss things with other people. And then I try to use things like music to encourage folks to talk about different things, which in this case, freedom, or sort of like what are conceptions of freedom, because personally, I've just been with this thread of like freedom has to be more than just, choosing to wear a blue shirt and blue glasses. It has to be more than being able to vote for one of two war criminals in an election or, being able to live where you want. So I really am trying to like advance that discussion with community, and that's what the project sort of took shape as.
Thank you so much for that description. I mean, I'm sorry, Melissa, were you going to say something?
No, I was just having a back of church pew moment where I was just going, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that description of your project really beautifully encapsulates what the Art and Change Grant is meant for. Those kind of underlying what's the why behind the project? What are we working towards? And we'll definitely tap you back in throughout this so that we can tie back to your project and have some examples for what the Art and Change Grant is really meant for, what kinds of works that it funds. So yeah, we can get started with the first slide, Melissa. Thank you so much. Shout out to Melissa for running slides. So we're going to talk about the Art and Change grant today, but before we dive into the specifics of the grant, I want to talk a little bit about the Leeway Foundation. The Leeway Foundation supports women, trans, and gender nonconforming artists and cultural producers living in the greater Philadelphia area who are working at the intersection of art and social change. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in just a moment. And so folks that are eligible to apply for our grants live in Bucks, Camden, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery, and or Philadelphia counties. These grants are for individual artists. So we grant individuals, not 501c3s. Although if you are working as a collective, you are also welcome to apply. Leeway seeks to recognize women, trans, and gender nonconforming artists whose work is often ignored, silenced, and marginalized because of what they create or who they are. So, for example, people of color, immigrants, queer and trans and gender nonconforming folks, poor and working class people, and people who take risks with art form and content to share their social change vision. And as a highlight, we also accept applications in both English and Spanish. And I also want to take a moment to say that when we say trans, we mean it in the most inclusive sense. So as an umbrella term encompassing transsexual, transgender, genderqueer, two-spirit folks, however you choose to self-identify. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So art for social change, what exactly does that mean? Our grants are for folks who are working at this intersection between art and social change. And what that means at Leeway is that art for social change has a vision and an intentional analysis. It's art with vision that impacts not just a few individuals, but communities for change. So essentially, what is the impact of your art that is rippling beyond just you and a few people, right? Your art might raise consciousness. It might be a tool or strategy for organizing and movement building. It might challenge various oppressions like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. It may preserve and reclaim traditional cultural practices, create space for expression and community, and honestly, a lot more. These bullet points are just a few ideas to get you started about how your artwork, how your project may impact communities in a larger way. The biggest questions that you can ask yourself, and we'll repeat this throughout the presentation, is how does your art create action and how does your art impact community? Sweet, at this point, I'd like to pause for a moment and ask you, can you talk a little bit about the process of applying and what inspired you to apply?
The process for applying, it was exciting. It was also challenging. I think that at that point in my life in 2022, I had been applying to lots of different opportunities and grants, and I hadn't found that space where I really met success and received a granting opportunity yet. I also feel like I was really stuck in a loop of applying to grants too that also didn't offer any feedback. So I would, go through a really intensive process with self and like articulating why my work is so important to me and the projects that I really believed about. And then just, what I would get back was like, thank you, receive, X amount of, without sort of, even any communication about what I felt like the folks were looking for. So that was really hard for me, but I feel like I got a lot of positive signs from Leeway as far as, there were so many opportunities to, hop on a call and to, hear from artists in the Leeway community about, like information sessions like this. And also there was a lot of like help sessions where I think like, I just like called Leeway and like I just talked to Melissa for the first time randomly and I was like, this is who I am. I'm out here trying to do this. And Melissa was like, that's cool. Here's the supports that we have for you. Try to tap in with those as it works with your schedule. And I feel like I was really able to do that. And like, I feel like too, going through the application process, it helped me to articulate some things about myself that I like knew, but I didn't like have the framework of like, yes, I'm an artist specifically working for social change. Like I am creating art so that people go to it and then they leave it differently and they move into their life carrying sort of like the difference, whether that's like, being more open to listening to a certain kind of music, if it's, looking back to lenses of the past and like ancestors that come before us and teach us how, our art practices can exist in greater harmony today. Like all those things are like the changes that my work encompasses. Um, I think that answers, I think you asked me two questions, but I feel like that kind of outlines what it was like applying for it at the time.
Yeah, can you speak to what inspired you to apply, or is that also kind of part of that answer?
I think it's definitely a part. I think that it felt like the time was right.
Okay.
I felt very, I mean, Juneteenth had just become a holiday as well in 2021, which is a holiday that's very much about like freedom and like I would say like time travel even like there's months after where people are like living without getting this information that you know slavery is abolished. And so I was like, okay, like this is just feeling really right in 2022 for me to apply with this vision of a work of like, okay, music is where I'm going to think about freedom, like a personal freedom to try and play what I want to play, or freedom that feels like when I listen to "Free" by Denise Williams, I feel free, like I feel untethered to this reality, this whatever's going on. I just like I could get outside of that for a moment to actually think about what do I want this to mean to myself. So it just felt very like right for me at the time to put my work to Leeway in this way. And also there was multiple years, like art change happens every single year. So I was like, okay, if I don't get it this year, I get feedback and I apply again. So all of that felt like something I could take on at the time.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll highlight this again later, but we really do try here to support folks and meet them where they're at. Like our doors are always open. Melissa is a fantastic support for potential applicants. And we always encourage folks to reach out. And also something you mentioned is about the application, kind of helping you articulate the way you speak about certain elements of your practice. We'll definitely dive into the application in just a moment. But yeah, those questions definitely take some thinking over.
Also, I'll just mention, Sweet, when you called that first time, you were so clear in what your artistic practice was and what you wanted to offer the community, right? And so for me on the other end, I was like, this is a slam dunk, baby, because it just felt so aligned with those two questions of like, how does your art create action and how does it engage the community? It felt clear just from like a 5 minutes of talking to you. And so when you see this list, if you're on this call and you're looking at this list right now about what do we mean by art for social change, don't be intimidated and think that your work has to do everything on this list. This is not meant to be an exhaustive checklist. Your work could be doing one of these bullets and that be enough, okay? So don't let the imposter syndrome creep in. So
Definitely. All right, we can head to the next slide. Thank you. In terms of what we fund all kinds of artistic practices, uh, both traditional and non-traditional. We have funded visual artists, dancers, actors, and media makers to hair braiders, aromatherapists, and DJs. What matters is that there's an impact to the work that you're doing, right? In terms of grant decisions, they're not made by Leeway staff. So Melissa and I are not the ones making these decisions, but the decisions are made by a rotating peer panel of community-based artists and cultural producers through a consensus-based process, right? As mentioned earlier, we tried to be the gentler, kinder, and more supportive foundation. Our doors are always open to y'all. We understand that applying for grants can be a tough or intimidating process, sometimes an exhausting process. So we host multiple information sessions and we host one-on-one applicant support sessions. And all of this will be shared in an email post-session to you guys, so you have access to all of these links. We're here to help and support. Honestly, it's like the joys of the work is meeting with artists and talking to them about the projects. So please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know how we can help. And as mentioned earlier, every single person who applies to Leeway receives feedback. We believe that feedback is a right and not a luxury, and that if you are putting time and energy into a grant application, you should understand why the panel said yes or no. And a quick shout out to this photo from Sweet's project, Soundtrack and Freedom. Sweet, can you share, I know you mentioned getting panel feedback, but can you share your experience about receiving that? Did you find it helpful or hurtful in the overall process?
I think it was super helpful. I think it's been helpful in grants where I have received the grant, like in the case of Leeway, but I've also applied to another residency program that year that took place in Baltimore, and I didn't get it, and I got the feedback back. And I think it really helped me to refine the ways that I talk about my work, but also to like not internalize, my work not being right or perceived at the time when I was really like sort of feeling, I would say almost like a desperation to like be affirmed that like, yeah, like my practice was worthy of being funded and supported. Which I think that like, you know, I just like affirm to myself now, even still like in the process of things, is that like, the things that I want me back. And I feel like, that's something I would say to like any artist, like, what you want and desire for your work, it wants you as well. And things happen in timelines that are like beyond even our understanding at times. And there's no feeling like, every single no that you've gotten sort of like building up the energy behind that yes that allows, your work to come into fruition. And then yeah, too, just like sort of, the dream that you imagine when you apply to a grant, slightly shifting perhaps in the ways that they do come into the world in the form of your project. But like having that initial seed be something that you already are nurturing through bringing it to a granting process.
I love that every single no is building up to the energy behind the yes, right? Grant making, unfortunately, we can't grant every project that is submitted, right? Grant making is a reductive process. There are limited funds, but we hope that the feedback is the gift that you can receive, right? That it helps you understand the decision, and hopefully that it helps you in future grant applications, right? All right, we can head to the next slide. Okay, so now after all that, let's talk about the specifics behind the Art and Change Grant. The Art and Change Grant, which we always abbreviate to ACG, provides project-based grants of up to $2,500 to women, trans, and gender nonconforming artists and cultural producers in Greater Philadelphia to fund art for social change projects. And that deadline is August 1st. Next slide. All right, so again, that deadline is August 1st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Roughly between 70 to 90 people apply for the ACG in each cycle, and each cycle awards anywhere between 15 to 20 projects, usually 20 projects. In terms of eligibility, you have to be 18 years old. You have to live in our funding region, which again is Bucks, Camden, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery, or Philadelphia County. You have to self-identify as a woman, trans, or gender nonconforming person, and you cannot be a full-time student enrolled in an arts degree granting program. So if you are a student who is not in an arts degree granting program, you're still eligible. If you are in a part-time art program, you're still eligible. And just to note that if you are funded, we will ask for you to submit proof of age and residency. Quick note that the Art and Change Grant is for work that you want to do, like it has not been done yet. We don't fund retroactively. So if you're already thinking about a project, you might wonder, you might seek funding for a new phase or a new element of that project, right? So the Art and Change Grant can fund a project in its entirety or just a phase of a project. And in the application, we'll talk about this again later, but in the application, there's room to talk about exactly what this $2,500 grant request will be going to for your project if it is a phase. As you're thinking about your project, keep in mind that you won't hear back from the panel for 10 to 12 weeks. So a starting date of about November 1st is probably more appropriate than like August 31st. Like that's not going to work because you won't hear back at that point. So again, everything that the Art and Change Grant supports needs to be a social change-based art project impacting a larger group, audience, or community. So again, those questions that we'll keep bringing up is, how does the art create action and how does it engage community? Essentially, what changes as a result of the work you're doing? Um, and just a shout out to Batik, which is a pop-up gallery and cinema highlighting Southwest Asian and North African women and queer artists. This was another project that got funded through the ACG. All right, next slide. Okay, so before we dive into the actual application, let's talk a little bit about social change intents. So a social change intent is something on this list. This is the list in its entirety here. And we'll ask you to select at least one, but no more than 3 categories from this list. And these should best describe the intention or the vision behind your project. So you should pick intents that resonate with you as the core intent and vision of your work. Sometimes we see folks say like, oh, but my work does all of this, which may be true, but select 1 to 3 that are really at the core of the work that you're doing. We do not define what these intentions are. You will just have access to this list in the application. And there's room for you in the application to describe exactly what these intentions mean to you. So you can self-define what racial justice means to you or what feminism means to you. All right, next slide. All right, cool. So now we're diving into the application. One of the first questions you'll be asked is the short project description. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Can we go back to the last slide? I overshot a little bit. So from this list of social change intents, it's important to take your time in deciding which ones are at the core of your work, because later in the application, there's a question that directly asks about what you choose as your social change intent. Okay, and so here, Sweet, can you talk a little bit about how you selected social change intents for your project? And how did you talk about how your project engaged with those intents and issue areas?
I think for me, it sort of ended up being broken up into like 2 different categories because I feel like, some of these folks who my general art practice, which is like, I feel very aligned with like, trans justice as a transgender person. The way that I move about my work is to create spaces where that's possible. And that sort of like fits into every single thing I feel like that I do. So then like as far as then the project that I was looking at advancing, then I sort of thought more specifically about the project and about what the project would be addressing. And that sort of like helped me to break it up because I feel like very excited about like a lot of these things here and about the way threads of that could come up in like, in my work. Totally.
Okay. Yeah, I like the way you describe the process of selecting and how trans justice is kind of like a lens that you see all of your work through. And then based on the project, you kind of selected others that your work was directly engaging. Yeah. All right, Melissa, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Sure, yeah. It was a really smart way to think about your social change intent, Sweet. I'll just echo that because you got to make a case that said trans justice is racial justice. Trans justice is LGBTQ social movement work, right? Trans justice is economic, like you made a case that this umbrella of trans justice, cultural preservation, and LGBTQ social movements encompass so much more than what they might just seem like on the surface. So I actually really appreciated the way in which you held that up. And there will be a question that just speaks directly to this. It's question 3 in the application. You'll see it in just a minute. That's going to ask, what did you pick here and how is it happening in your application? But first you'll get asked what your short project description is. And so essentially this is your elevator pitch, right? It's briefly where you're going to talk about the what, the who, and the why of the work. We're going to ask you to answer it in 3 to 5 sentences about what your project is talking about. And I know that that can be a really hard thing to do sometimes. And so I'll often recommend that you write your grant and then come back and think about your short project description after you get everything out on the table. You'll want to think about, like, what's the art form? Who is the work featuring, and who is the work created for, and why? And why are you creating it? Sweet, you did a really beautiful example of this in your short project description, really clear, really clear cut. And would you mind if I shared it aloud, Sweet, with the group? Sweet, you good?
Oh yeah, you totally can. Sorry.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Just wanted to make sure we had that consent. So when Sweet answered the short project description, one of the first things the panelists saw on this application before they read any experience pages, any questions, Sweet wrote, "Soundtracking Freedom is a community-centered music and wellness experience rooted in traditional Southern cultural expressions of blues, jazz, and gospel. This event will feature musical performance and storytelling and invite Black gender expansive folks and allied communities into conversation to envision and access sonic landscapes of freedom." It's like chef's kiss to that. Sweet, I'm curious, how did you boil it down to that beautiful, those beautiful 2 sentences, if you think about it?
I actually did have to go backwards. I really consciously remember going backwards because I think when I first came to Leeway, this was the question I felt the most primed to answer, but it definitely wasn't in 5 sentences. It was like, this project is all of these things to me. And so as I sort of moved through other questions in the application, I realized where I was already sort of saying, like, I already got an opportunity to say who I was, what's
Yeah.
bringing me to this work right now, why does this matter to me, so that it really sort of allowed me to think, okay, like if I'm really focusing in on this specific story or this specific part of, my life as an artist, this is one work within it. How can I talk about that thing without trying to make this 3 to 5 sentences sort of fit every single thing else that sort of like can take.
Right. Gorgeous. I mean, you tell us what the art form is right away. You're like, it's a community-centered music and wellness event featuring musical performance and storytelling. Art form's clear. Then you tell us who's being featured in the work very clearly: Black, gender expansive folks, and allied communities. And then you hit us with the why. You're like, okay, it's to envision and access sonic landscapes of freedom. And of course, you use the rest of the application to expand on who would be performing, how the performers might be booked, and expand on what it means to access a sonic landscape of freedom and why that matters in terms of collective liberation at the end of the day. So yeah, it was really gorgeously done. And there's a reason why we're lifting it up today to share with folks as they think about applications of their own. Um, I'll also mention that if at any point you have questions about Leeway's application, you don't have to hold them to the end. Gabe and I are here. When one of us isn't talking, the other one of us can answer in the chat. And so please let us know if there's anything that we can answer for you there as we walk through this session. The next thing you'll hit in the application is called the experience page. And this is pretty different from other grant applications that usually just ask you to upload a CV or a resume, right? This is Leeway's attempt to do something very different, quite honestly, especially compared to most other art funders that support individuals. We don't ask for work samples. We don't ask for artist resumes or CVs for a reason. If we wanted those, we'd ask for them. We're trying to honor the applicant's journey and experience as an artist, quite honestly. It's especially important for folks who might not have traditional or formal arts education, whatever that means, or validation from the quote unquote academy. If we're learning anything with UArts and PAFA shutting down recently, we're learning that those systems and institutions are not set up to support us anyway. And so artists may not have exhibited in traditional arts galleries or have been recognized by traditional institutions, but they can totally 100% still be doing this work in community and creating change. We know that. So instead of work samples or artist resumes or CVs, we asked for 4 to 10 personal, professional, or political experiences that have led you to your work as an artist today. And so we really are curious about why are you here? What led you to put this application in? What inspired you to get to this point, right? You do not have to just recreate a resume here. This is not a LinkedIn page. No shade to LinkedIn, but it's not, you know. The panel is really curious about what brought you to this space today. If you have the capacity, don't be afraid to pull the curtain back on who you are a little bit on this page. The panel wants to get to know you, quite honestly. This is a peer panel. This is a community-based panel of artists just like you. So they're hungry to get to know why you're here and who you are. And so balance those personal and professional things with the political things. If the first time you created media was you were 4 years old in your living room with the camera, and your mama handed you that camera and suddenly you felt like you had the power of a superhero in your hand, give us that moment so we can understand your trajectory to possibly proposing the media project you're proposing today in your application, right? We'll ask that you give us a minimum of 4 experiences, but I really encourage people to use the space that you have there because quite honestly, this is a competitive grant. So use the space to give the panel a sense of who's spearheading this work. Each experience can be up to essentially about 2 sentences, right? And so don't be afraid to really dig into that experience. I know it looks just like a line on the application, and so you might think, let me keep it super brief, but going the extra mile there really matters. And so instead of saying something like, I attended the Allied Media Conference, okay, you attended the conference, cool. If I'm a panelist, I might not know what the Allied Media Conference is, and I definitely don't know why it was important to you. So if you just say a little bit more, it really matters. So instead, you might say, I attended the Allied Media Conference, and it was the first time I got to share my work with other queer and trans filmmakers. Suddenly, it's starting to get built out in a different way, especially if it relates to the work that you're applying for in your grant. The additional context matters. If you're a stickler, you can, you want to know the character count, it's on the online application, but it's 325 characters if you're working in that Google Doc and you need to stretch every character to the limit, there you go, 325, you know? The other thing is there's no right or wrong experience, friends. Like truly there's not. We just strongly recommend that you think about experiences that connect to the work that you're proposing or the social change intents that your work is embodying, right? And then out of those 4 to 10 experiences, you'll get to pull one out that we refer to as the highlighted experience, right? And so you'll get to expand more deeply with about a paragraph on that one. And we recommend that that is the most compelling experience in terms of its relationship to your project and the work that you're applying to do. And so a little bit different, no resume, no CV, no work samples, but this thing that we call the experience page. It's actually my favorite page in the application because I'm never not blown away by how real people are with us and what they share with us in the panel and what brings people to this work. It's really, really powerful stuff. And so, Sweet, can you talk a little bit about how you did the experience page?
Yeah, this is something that was very challenging for me, but like after I had a meeting with Cinta, actually, like there was like a option to request support. I was really able to like understand what I was able to share, which is, I definitely use the highlighted experience to talk about why I'm able to do the project I was proposing. So I talked about another show that I organized, which I've been organizing shows for like, for many years at that point. And I'm realizing like, if folks are coming to my shows, this is a place where they're going to be surrounded in a space with other Black, queer, and trans people, and how meaningful and nourishing and important it is to like have that experience as a performer, gathering people to play with, as an audience member witnessing that, like that whole social fabric was really important. So I chose to talk about a show where I got to organize that and be really successful. But I also got to talk about things like I talked about my first time at a Porch Fest in Philly and just like realizing how rich the musical community is here and about, seeing myself as a part of that specifically because I'm going to create spaces for, you know, even in Philly, like, I still like a lot of places I go, the majority am seeing like, cis folks on lineups. So like,
Mhm.
to be able to add that. But to see that was really like important to me. And I also wrote about a book, blues legacies and Black feminism, um, by Angela Davis, which is like I picked up that book like now 8 years ago, so it's like 6 years ago from when I applied to the Leeway grant, and that book just articulated just because Angela Davis, it was just like blues
Oh,
is
gee.
political.
Yeah.
Blues is political. Like, people working in this medium, you know, when you perform a certain song on a stage, it could just be like, oh, I'm just like, vibing in the corner to the song. But it's like if you listen to the words, the reason why what it did in that set, what it spoke to the community at that time, it mattered. So I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna trace all these histories of these gender variant and women blues figures and talk about why what they were saying at the time matters and how it set up the feminism work that I'm doing today. And I was like, wow, music, like, not only do I see music doing this, like, it really does it. Look, here's a book about it. So I wrote about that in that section too. Like, reading that book really hit for me. And it still hits for me to this day. I pick up that book like every few months to just
Yeah,
try.
you can hear it. I can hear it in your voice talking about it, right? It's like the transformative book. I mean, that's the beautiful, I'm like a sucker for a good book, and that's the beauty of it, right? You can come back to it time and time again, and there'd be new visions and new learnings for you in the mix. Um, you did a beautiful job in your experience page of letting the panel know that you not only have the professional chops to do this thing, to organize this like event experience, right? And that you had the musical chops to do it, but you also had the cultural and community chops to do this shit too, for lack of a better phrase. Excuse my Philadelphia mouth as I rock with y'all tonight. So you had this beautiful blend of it that I thought was really helpful for the panel to understand why you were the person to do this work. Then there's going to be these questions. Bum, bum, bum. This is the meat and potatoes, the 6 questions on the application. I'm not going to do a super deep dive into them today, but I do want to mention them. These questions are the kinds of questions and answers that we can go over in a one-on-one applicant support session. What Sweet just lifted up when they said they met with Cinta and talked about their experience page, this is ripe for an applicant support session. And so please take us up on those sessions. We will have plenty of them virtually, and we'll also be at one of the Philadelphia libraries. If you're based out in Northwest Philadelphia or not, we'll be in Mount Airy at the Lovett Library right on Germantown Avenue. Hopefully it'll be a beautiful summer day so you can come out, have some snacks, and talk about your application with us. It really is the joy of our life to do that stuff. So these are the 6 questions you'll see. First one's going to ask you to summarize your art for social change project and really consider the who, what, when, and where, and what it looks like, essentially. You'd be surprised to find out that because folks know that Leeway is social change based, right? Sometimes they spend all of question number 1 talking about the social intent behind their work. And while, yeah, we do need to know about that, don't forget to tell us what it sounds like, what the art looks like, right? So for instance, Sweet could have just said, I'm creating a music festival. And it could have been the end of the story, but there's so many different genres and types of music. Who's part of it, right? What might it feel like? What might we hear or see if we're part of it, right? I use visual art a lot when I think about the first question as an example, because you could say, I'm going to create paintings. Okay, but are they large scale? Are they miniatures that you could hang 50 of them in a 3x3 space, right? Are they acrylic, watercolor? Like there's so many different options. And so don't forget to tell us about the art in that first question. It's really important to understand how the rest of the questions build on it. A second question, I feel like you got this one. Why is the project important to you? And why is it urgent? Right? Like, what is the urgency right now in 2024 in August when you're applying for this work, right? what's happening socioeconomically, what's happening politically, what's happening culturally. Help make a case for the panel to say yes to you because they can't deny that it's urgent and needs to happen right now. For question number 3, this is that question that we referred to earlier as when you're picking those social change intents, be thoughtful about what you pick because this question is going to ask directly about it. What are the goals and intended impacts of this project, right? What are the goals? You know what you're trying to achieve through this work. How will the art create action, particularly around those social change intents you selected earlier in the application? And so if you selected trans justice, how is the art that you're describing, question 1 and 2, going to create some change for trans folks on the ground, in Philadelphia and or beyond? So really think about what you choose as your social change intent, because number 3 is going to ask about it. Number 4 is when we start to ask about you a little bit. You've got that experience page. We're starting to get to know a little bit about you through that, right? But we're going to just ask you to plainly define your community or audience and what your relationship to the audience or communities that you're working with in this project is, and how your identity or who you are play a role in this, right? And so we'll ask you to think about all the intersections that make you who you are, right? That could be your age, your race, your class, your neighborhood. Philly is a city of neighborhoods, baby. And so as a Philly native, it can look very different. Those South Philly folks ride hard, those Kensington folks ride hard, right? Like that might make a difference, your geography in terms of what you're doing here. It might matter if your gender identity is a certain way, or your sexuality, or who you are, right? Like really think about all the various intersections of what makes you you and how that matters into the audiences and the communities that you're working with. Just a tip, sometimes folks will say, I'm working with the community that I am a part of. And it's almost as if that they don't need to be accountable to that community still. And we know, and our panelists know, that just because you identify as part of a community doesn't mean that they necessarily want to be engaged by that work or have asked you to be there, right? And so, for example, I'll use myself. I'm a queer person, right? And there are some queer people that I would ride or die for and go to the ends of the earth for. And there are some other queer people who I would not want near me with a 10-foot pole, with much respect to who they are and what they do. And so help the panel understand why you and how are those intersections helping you work in this community. Of course, you can work in communities that are not your own. That's totally fine. But the panel is going to have some additional questions around those, right? Especially around how you enter and exit those communities, just to make sure that you're not parachuting in and out, especially for a grant project. Real talk. Number 5 is going to ask all about who your community is, right? And how the project engages and impacts them, particularly in the Philadelphia region. Leeway is a local funder. So really think about how the Philadelphia region is being changed as a part of this work and engaged as a part of this work. If you're proposing to travel somewhere else and impact, let's say, Houston, Texas, this might not be the grant for you because there needs to be a local impact and a local engagement of some sort here. The other thing to avoid, just like a pro tip when you answer this 5th question, is to avoid saying, my community is everyone. I make art for all people. Now, your art can totally be accessible to everyone, and everyone could be welcome in it. But who is your target audience? Who are you creating for? Who do you hope engages, and who will be impacted here? It oftentimes, my community is everyone, is often too broad. So be as specific as possible when you get to this question. And then last but not least, you're going to talk about your change partner and what they might, what expertise or support they'll provide to you and the communities that you're working with. Sweet. In terms of your change partner, who did you pick and why?
My change partner is or was a brilliant artist Angel Edwards. And at the time, they were someone I knew because I would see them at the events that I would do or at events, but we didn't really know each other very well. But I find myself in spaces a lot with friends who are closer and people I'm getting to know where as artists we're talking about our art, we're talking about our work. And yeah, I am deeply like embedded in Black queer community, kind of like across the East Coast, like wherever I'm going, I'm trying to like interact with folks and sort of like really drop in with people in ways that just like expand so much over time. And I think like in those spaces, I'm very honest and folks are very honest with talking about what's important to them. Like I talk to people about the books I'm reading. I talk to people about the work that I dream about. And, I try to share with people as I find that they're in my community, about what matters to me while, also having this other experience of like, yeah, I'm on the base and people see me at shows all the time. They might like have more, different like awareness of me than I do with them. But as I was sort of like talking about this project in different spaces, I sort of was like talking with Angel and they really, I feel like they understood what I was trying to do. And they also were so close to so many people here. And they were like, this is a project that I see being really great for a lot of different people across Philly. And I was like, I didn't even really like say it. But they were kind of like, I could, be a change partner with you. I've worked with Leeway before. And I also had an experience with another friend too that also was like, oh, I could like sort of work with you as well. Because what I looked up and realized actually in community with like a lot of Leeway artists, like a lot of folks who I was friends with already had sort of like supported work that I had been touched with and impacted by through this program, which like that also felt like a confirming sign for me to like want to apply. But um, yeah, Angel felt like the right choice at the time. So, I was like, I definitely, especially too, since they had been coming to the shows I had organized in Philly, and that was like actually how we sort of had awareness of each other. It was like, oh, I saw you came to, an event I did at like Grant Boulevard, which is in West Philly, and some other things. That was kind of that.
I love that you had this like beautiful problem of like, hey, I could be your change partner. You want me to be your change partner, right? That's always a good moment when you're like, you look around and you're like, oh, people I respect and admire are actually telling me to do this thing. That's a good sign to apply. And that's one way that a lot of our folks come to apply for these grants. Real talk, word of mouth is like Leeway's best marketing times 100. That's because our grantees are amazing. Grantees like Angel Edwards, who was your change partner. The other thing I want to note is that your change partner can be essentially any person or place or business or nonprofit or whomever can provide you the access and the support that your project needs, essentially, right? And so for you, Sweet, it was like, oh, this person's already in community, they're well connected, they're attached to the communities I want to work with. It'll make this go smoother, easier. They're just my connector, they're my conduit, right? And so Angel was a good fit for you, right? But it can really be anybody or business, nonprofit that might support you, right? And so it might look like your great auntie who might be the cultural keeper of like a Puerto Rican craft and textile practice, if that's what you're applying for. And so let your auntie be your change partner. It could be PhillyCam, a great media resource center that's here in Philadelphia, because maybe they're giving you access to the equipment to make your film. Or it could be your neighbor who lives in West Philly for years and has been on the block and has all the cultural knowledge of that block in West Philly, because you're going to do a project on gentrification and you want to bring a long-term neighbor into the mix, right? And so it really is about who is the person that can support you the best in this project. The one thing about a change partner is they cannot financially benefit. And so we don't want your change partner to be in it because they are a budget line. We want your change partner to be in it because they actually authentically want to support you in this work, right? They are asked to complete what is called a change partner form. It's essentially just 3 questions, right? It's a form separate from your application, and it essentially asks them to think about why you're the one who should be doing this. They essentially vouch for you, right? Change partner forms can make or break an application. So really be thoughtful about who you ask to do this for you, because they can really sell it and they can really sink it if they don't thoughtfully answer these questions about who you are, why you're qualified, and what support they'll offer you throughout this project. The other
Yeah,
thing, oh, go for it, Sweet.
I was gonna say that at Angel had really organically sort of offered me all of the things that you just said, um, because the feedback I received from them about the event where we sort of like really first met, even though I didn't even remember like meeting them at this point. They were just like, it was so black, it was so queer. Like I've been to music events where there's been a lot of black queer folks, but the entire band was also black, queer, and trans people. Like I hadn't experiencing that was like very fruitful and important for me to see that at that time. So I just knew that like it would really hit some of the things in my application and really like add dimension to them. And yeah, like for transparency, like, Angel and I's relationship like developed differently from that point, but really at the time when they were my change partner, we were just sort of encountering each other. But I really knew them as someone, yeah, that I was seeing them with like a lot of people in Philly. Um, yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Also, I love that it blossomed into what it is today. That's it's a beautiful happening. You know, I like to think about Leeway being part of that story too, I hope. Cool. I'm gonna skip your response just for the sweet sake of time. And I want to leave a little bit of time for folks at the end here after we talk about the budget. The last piece of this application is a project budget. Now, do not sweat the budget, okay? Sometimes you see a budget and you're like, oh no, man, here's the budget. I'm not good at those things, or I hate doing them. It's all right. You're essentially going to think about how is everything that I've talked about in those 6 questions reflected in this budget? And how is everything that I'm talking about in this budget reflected in those 6 questions? And so if you're talking about in your budget, VR goggles for your event, the panel's going to swipe back to those 6 questions and be like, VR goggles, hold up, where were you using the virtual reality at, right? And so just make sure that what's in your budget, what's in your narrative actually run parallel to each other so that the panel can understand what kind of story your budget is telling, because your budget will tell a story about what you value, what you don't value. So I oftentimes encourage folks, pay yourself, pay your participants if you can. I think it's really important to think about compensation, especially for folks if you're inviting them into the work. And the panel, especially more recently, has been looking at those things, particularly around compensation, especially post-pandemic. It becomes really important. It doesn't have to include every tiny small detail your budget. You can encapsulate things like project supplies. We know this is for work that you're proposing, and so the budget will switch up and change likely, but give folks a sense of what you think this $2,500 will go to. And if it exceeds that amount, you'll be asked how you'll bridge that gap and raise the remaining money and an additional question. Sweet. Any advice for budgets for this fine folks on the call?
I think you should always pay yourself, and don't shortchange yourself either. Like there's so many hours that go in uncounted, that you should try to honor. I also think it's always good to keep a miscellaneous section. When I apply to grants, I try to keep miscellaneous to about like 10%, but you never know where that extra money might need to go to. Like you might have to buy like camera, like I took in Polaroid pictures at a recent event, and I had to buy like 10 packs of Polaroid camera film. And it came from the little miscellaneous line item that I had to go to the camera store and be like, here's that money. So I think those are the two things. I would say.
Yeah. There's a great question in the chat that I want to just take a moment to hold up. So, honey, you asked this really brilliant question. Do you all have any guidance on pay structures? Like, is there an honorarium that the panel would look at and say, why is that so much? Because I like to pay my folks very well. I'd like to you answer it too, honey. I think give them the context for why you're paying it so well. I think sometimes, a common thing that I see happen is someone will pay themselves like $2,000 out of this project budget, but they'll also be talking about community members that they're interviewing as part of their project. And those community members might be getting like 20 bucks a pop, right? So that's going to say something to the panel about who you value and why, right? Unless you can make a good case around why is 20 for them and 2,000 for you. So think about balance when you do it. It could be possible. There might be a reason why it's 2,000 for you, right? And why it's 20 for community members. Just give them context for that, and balance out that amount. I think it ultimately depends on your project. And this is like one of those questions we'd love to get into in an app support session around like, well, what are you asking your folks to do? How much time, how much energy are you asking of them? Are they actually like hardcore collaborators? Then that amount looks different than if you're just asking them to come to a workshop, And so come and chat with us. We've got some ideas around this and definitely some more questions around what you're dreaming about and thinking about, honey. But I love that you asked that question. Last but not least, we're here to help. Real talk. Sweet, is there anything else that you want to, any parting wisdom advice you want to give folks as they go out? No pressure, just the wisdom of, sages. So
I'm just like, I just think that like believing in your work is so important. And like I said, I was in a very challenging time when I applied to the Leeway grant. Like I was when I first was like, integrating into Philly, like those first years in Philly were challenging. Like I was staying on my friend's couch when I applied to the Leeway grant. And like I love my friend. I love my friend's couch. We had a great time, but it was a very challenging space for me. But I really believed in my work and I believed in myself as a part of it. And yeah, like a lot of shifting had to happen in my thinking to really like what I still really believe is like anything that I want wants me so much more, and like things are going to come to me when I'm also ready to receive them. And at the time I received the Leeway grant, I was really ready to put that energy into the people around me, into the world around me, and like that's still like rippling out for me today, like in my practice, the fact that Soundtrack and Freedom was able to manifest through the support of the Leeway Foundation. Like, and I think it's like, yeah, it's still echoing in everything that I'm doing because I'm doing a lot. But yeah, this was kind of like what feels like a beginning for me with this part of my practice. So
that's the goal. Use this as a stepping stone to whatever else is coming down the pike, right? It's $2,500, which is, a chunk of change, but it's not a world of change. And so leverage that first phase of some work with an art and change grant and then skyrocket to wherever you're heading next. We love to see folks leverage this funding for other funding and other investment. And so lean in and try. Even if it's a yes, beautiful, then you're $2,500 richer in your bank account to do this work. And if it's a no, come back, get the feedback, reapply if you're up for it, right? Because oftentimes a no is just a not now, and it's time to circle back around again. Okay, we're really here to support. You'll see all those applicant support sessions that are coming up on July 11th, July 24th, and July 29th. You can scan that QR code. We'll also share these slides out with direct links to those. But really, do not hesitate. Deadline's not until August 1st, so we got plenty of time to dream and think about what's possible through this grant. I think more now than ever in this election year, when the world seems like it's on fire, when there's so many things that need our attention and our love and our resistance, real talk, propose the thing that you might be scared to do. The world might need to see it now more than ever. So really lean in, Sweet, I just want to thank you for being here before we open up for some questions. Gabe and I will stay on for another 10 or however long folks might need. But Sweet, thank you so much. Give it up for Sweet, y'all. They're incredible. Go listen to their music, go to their vinyl swaps, whatever they do, just support them. Thank you, Sweet.